And what I suggest is learn to dodge words like that.
Mm,
Let the
mm,
always word go by,
mhm,
or the tone. Just kind of don't,
mhm.
when they say and they point the finger, just kind of try to get out of the way of those and stay zeroed in, focused on what is it they want me to hear. Because they're hurt, they're angry about something.
Right,
What is it?
right,
I mean, that, and here's the deal, Mark. That's what I want someone to do with me.
right, right.
This is how and why I know that how I learned the principles that I teach is over this, because this is how I want people to communicate with me.
Yeah,
So the question is, am I willing to do it with others?
yeah.
Welcome again to It Doesn't Take a Genius, conversation with introspective perspectives and pithy points of view. Here are your hosts, my friends, Max and Marty.
I think that's Mark and Mike.
Yeah, whatever.
Here we are yet again. There is no Mike Marshall yelling out my last name to start our episode. And you know what that means. It means we have a very special guest on the podcast today. This is my friend, Mark Olsey. And I guess, Mark, I'm going to say this as sort of a preamble to us talking. We were introduced through my friend from college, Mariah. She is a whip smart biochemical researcher who studies proteins in cells and how it relates to things like cancer and metastasis. She's really, really
Wow.
smart. And you met her at a reception, and she said, I think you need to talk to my friend Mark Ramsey. And I 100% concur with her opinion. It's fascinating. I love it when there is another discipline that enters the discipline that I'm studying and figures out a breakthrough. And it's this is a long preamble, but I've got to tell you this. I just received in the mail, I'm going to hold this up so you can see it,
Okay.
a stack of books on the founding fathers. And this came from a retired military person. I'm going to speak very anonymously for his sake. Background in finance and research, and served our country well in a very dangerous position. And he was making the point to me. He said the founding fathers were combining all these different disciplines, the Bible, political theory from people like John Locke, who said, that we had a right to life, liberty, and property, was what he said. English common law, the idea of the Roman Republic and classical thought, and some of them farmers, some of them were lawyers, but all of those threads came together into this tapestry that you and I are about to celebrate on the 4th of July. I think by the time our episode airs, it'll be after the 4th. But that's sort of what's happening here, because I'm studying some things from the perspective of a coach for businesses and workplaces. And doggone if I'm not talking right now to a marriage and family counselor. So Mark, that's a very long-winded way of saying welcome, Mark. And could you give us a little sort of history of how you got to where you're at now?
I can do that. First of all, I just want to say thank you. Thank you, Mark.
Oh,
It has been fun just getting to know you.
Yeah.
And more than that, it's been a delight. And I have hung up on a couple of our calls and went back and talked to my wife and said, I really like this guy. I've said it a couple of times. I thought, wish we could connect more and so forth. So this is fun for me. It's a delight for me,
Yeah,
and a wonderful opportunity. Thank you for having me on the podcast.
You bet.
Yeah. So I've been doing marriage counseling for honestly, even a couple more years than 35 years. So I've been doing what I'm doing for a long time.
Wow.
And I have literally, I've sat in front of couples, hundreds of them, probably thousands, for as many more hours. And what brought me here to our connection and the podcast here is what I kind of came away with and have developed as a result of watching people communicate is a means to go deeper with connection, have richer conversations, and have what I call healthy conflict conversations rather than arguments.
Yep. Yep.
And this came out of me watching people try to communicate. 4 to 5 couples come to me, and literally within the first 2 minutes, they say, "We can't communicate. We can't
Yeah.
communicate." And
Yeah.
I'd watch them for 2 minutes, and I
Right.
would say,
Totally
"You're right.
agree.
They can't do it." So I saw it, watched it, observed it over and over and over again, and I just began finding things that they were missing over and over and over again.
Mm,
That if they took these steps, this and then this and then this, the conversation took off and was amazing, and it enabled them to work through conflict. So I kind of noted all that,
yeah.
and that formed a teaching and training they do called Pledge Talk.
So you have turned this into a book. I will hold it up. The Pledge of a Lifetime, phenomenal book. And it's really interesting because, I'm a product of a very good marriage. My parents have a lovely marriage. And my mom would say, you better fight. Now, fight fairly, fight well. Because if you don't fight, you're not invested. But you have to fight in the right way. And meanwhile, I have clients at work that say things like, we can't communicate. I'll do an employee survey, and the number one comment will be, communication needs to be better around here, things like that. And the funny thing is that notice how poorly they've communicated, because I have no idea what they want me to work on. Is it this department talking to that department? Is it this manager talking to that employee? Is it who knows? And so even in that, it betrays the fact that they struggle to communicate. So my understanding is you've had some of your people that have gone through marriage conferences with you and retreats and so on, some of your private clients, but they're coming to you and saying, hey, could you come talk to my workplace? And so this has gone from a book for marriage, a marriage and family counseling, to it's a workplace book.
Yeah, I've started out myself. I grew up in more of with a lot of church background, and I began taking this to different churches and doing marriage conferences, teaching Pledge Talk, and we began hearing people say, "Hey, this process you teach, it called Pledge Talk, and again we'll get into it, but it's a 6-step process with pledge as an acronym,
right,
to define those 6 steps, help us to keep them in mind." But we began having parents come up and say, "Could we use this with our kids?" And we would say, "Absolutely, please teach and train your kids." In fact, my daughter, who's a kindergarten teacher, has taught her 5-year-olds to use this, and she has watched 5-year-olds talk through conflict. So yes, use it with your kids. Somebody else says, "Can I use this with a friend?" Yes. Somebody else, "Can I use this in my workplace?" Yes.
Right.
Because all of us struggle with communication.
Yeah.
And resolving of conflict because we weren't taught how to do it.
Yeah.
None of us grew up in a home. I say none of us. Literally, when I do a conference and talk to 100 people or 200 people, and I ask how many people grew up in a home, where mom and dad or grandma or somebody sat you down and said, "Hey, whoa, to you and your sibling or something,
right,
let's stop a second and let's talk a minute about how to have a good conversation here and talk this through."
Yeah.
It's like literally 1 out of 100 people have raised their hand, said that they've had anything like that.
Right.
And yet everybody has conflict.
Yeah.
And I tell those parents, if you don't teach your children what to do, they're going to experience conflict with their friends and one day with their marriage, and they're not going to know what to do. Or they're going to go in the workplace.
Right.
They're going to have conflict.
Yeah. And
they're not going to know what to do.
And
so yeah, it's gone from all different.
I was going to say that's 100% what I deal with, because I have those folks coming into my clients' workplaces. And, I think I was telling you earlier, it's very common for someone to say, a company to say, "Wow, you're really good at sales. We should make you a manager of all the salespeople." And that's not necessarily a logical step, right? They don't necessarily have the bundles of skills necessary. but the big bundle is communication in some form, and pledge talk is a phenomenal. Just to be frank, I've used it, in my marriage. It's just very clear and straightforward. And by the way, it doesn't mean you suddenly get home runs and get all your wants and wishes, right? But we'll get into that. I am confident as we go through this. But so do you mind? Could you just sort of walk us through the letters and sort of what those steps of pledge represent in the acronym, and maybe I'll sort of prompt you along the way. But let's start with the beginnings of this. And the P is for pause, correct?
It is. And what I say is, I teach this in the context of a conflict. So any one of us finds ourselves in a conflict. What do we do?
Oh, okay, so that's important. It's blown up in our face a little bit, or it's about to blow up in our face, and we can have this acronym in our head, and that's why P is the start.
That's exactly right.
Got it.
Because I think most of us don't even think about the idea of conflict because it's too uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Right. And we've had poor experiences with it. So it's painful. So we don't even we're conflict avoiders.
That's
most
right.
of us. And again, it's either because we've had bad experiences, or number one, or number two is we don't know what to do when we experience it.
Yeah.
So I think we largely go through life even ignoring little markers that might indicate we are in conflict or could be in conflict.
Yeah.
We ignore those markers and just kind of let them go by because we don't even want to think about it.
Yeah.
And so suddenly we find ourselves there.
Yeah.
We're in it. Somebody snaps. There's obvious tone. There's even the rolling of the eyes.
Yep.
There's a reactive response.
Yep.
Someone's volume has gone up.
Yeah.
And because you're uncomfortable.
Right.
It's here. It's on top of us right now.
Yeah.
What do we do? And the first thing I suggest is somebody hit the pause button.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I don't recommend you stick the device right in their face and say, pause, hit the pause button. We're going to do that kind of thing. That might exacerbate the conflict a little bit more. But it's the idea of recognizing we're in a spot where if this continues to go the way it is, it's almost inevitable that it's going to worsen.
Yeah.
And the relationship is going to go from good to bad or bad to worse. Mm-hmm. And what we do and what we say is going to be injurious.
So this is the if you can't say something nice, don't say nothing at all. And not just because you can't say something nice, but we're looking for the temperature to go down so that we can maybe come back at this a little more rationally.
That's perfect. A great way of saying it. There's a proverb, Mark, I was going to tell you, in line with what the phrase you just used. There's a proverb that says, "Death and life are in the power of the tongue." Mm-hmm. So this is, I believe, is absolutely true. Yeah. Literally, every word that comes out of my mouth, every word that comes out of your mouth, it has an effect. Yeah. On the people around me. It is either life-giving.
Yep.
It brings life to the relationship, greater depth, greater appreciation, greater joy, greater enjoyment, greater consensus or connection. Life, the words do that, or they bring death.
And for my audience, oh, by the way, if you're the manager, if you're the owner or executive in the company, you have no idea how long-lasting your words are. I mean, I have people quote to me, again, for life or for death, good or bad, words that were said a decade ago. He said to me, and it's still remembered to this day. I thought of another Bible verse that might carry us over. I think James says, be slow to speak, slow to get angry. So there's the pause. And then the rest of the verse is quick to listen.
Right.
So
Which
maybe,
moves us into the second step. But
yeah.
but let me talk a little more about the pause thing.
Oh,
So
please.
we're in that moment. We
Yep.
know something's going down. It's not good. And even we ourselves are prone to or want to react, perhaps. We're either wanting to shut down, pull away, which isn't helpful, or we want to react. That's not helpful.
Hmm.
Maybe we already have reacted.
Right.
Okay. And maybe it's then that we realize, oh, my lens, this is not going anywhere good. So my thought is, and I tell the couples I work with, I was telling a group of 17 leaders in a aerospace business here I spoke to a couple weeks ago. If we want to create a sense of safety amongst a team or in relationships, when we recognize this is happening, if we go at it, it's going to, significantly heighten fear and anxiety in everyone, and people are
Yep.
not going to be likely to share. So even how there's an effect on the relationship right here with the immediate person with me, but if there's others around me, it has an effect as well. So we need to hit the pause button to just keep this from going any further. Okay.
Hmm.
And then as you said, to lower the temperature,
Hmm.
to dial down our emotions.
Hmm.
So there are PET scans that show of the brain that show
Yep.
that literally when our emotions are real high, the rational part of the brain is literally shut down.
Hmm. Hmm.
Now, we've all heard the phrase, maybe we've said it, the idea that I was so angry I couldn't even think straight.
Yeah.
Okay. The PET scans show this is literally true.
That's what's happening. Yeah.
That's what's happening. My emotions are so high. The person's in front of me, his emotions, her emotions are so high. And we're not thinking straight.
Right.
We're not thinking well at all at this moment. How could we ever expect the conversation to go in a good way with that being the case, with the rational part of our brain shut down?
Yeah, we talk about amygdala hijack a few times on this podcast, and the idea of cortisol getting just sort of thrust through your brain and turning you into the fight or flight mode, which is
Yes.
really not true. It's fight or flight or freeze,
Yeah.
none of which are a good option, none of which move you forward in the relationship and in the problem solving that you really want to do with this other person, this other party. So yeah,
Exactly.
it makes perfect sense. Makes perfect sense.
So we have to dial down our emotions.
Yeah.
The next thing I say that while I'm in the pause mode, there's actually some personal work to do.
Hmm.
I've taught this in different settings and kind of find out that somebody says, okay, pause, and they go away and come back an hour later to talk, but they're at the exact same place they were an hour ago.
Yeah.
Because they haven't done any personal work,
Right.
Internal work. And what I mean by that is, again, when I'm saying pause, I'm saying pause because I don't want this to worsen, and because I know myself, I'm being reactive. And so I want to take some time away to get those emotions down. And there's a physiological component to that. Maybe I go on a walk. Maybe I just take some deep breaths.
Yep.
There's some if you have any spiritual life, maybe you pray. Maybe in talking with God, that's a way to help dial things down a minute.
Mm-hmm.
There's another thing you can do, and that is you do some mental work, and you tell yourself things like, this is my boss. Probably pretty important that I get to a place where we can have a good conversation. This is a friend that I want to keep as a friend. I appreciate this person. This is my spouse. This is my husband. This is my wife. This is my child, and I love them.
Yeah.
And I don't want to do anything to injure them. So I'm reminding myself of who the person is and why this is so important, that I deal with this, that we have a good conversation. Again, I just don't think we even stop to think about that at the moment. Yeah. Typically, we just naturally just kind of clash and we just get through it or get away and then we talk bad in our heads, at least, if not to other people, about the other person.
And I would have to think that some of this might boil down to getting a little more clear-headed about what just happened, that this person that I care about or that I am feeling responsible to, that it's not that they're necessarily the enemy. You know, like they maybe came into the conversation with the best of intentions, just like I did. There's just something that we're cross purposes on, and we need to get some clarity about that. But this person is not the enemy. It's we've got conflict that we need to name and walk through.
I love that. And if we had another 30 minutes, I could just talk about that. But I love the idea that we're not enemies. I love that. So that's beautiful. But tagging on a little bit with just what you just said, it is the kind of one other little piece of work that I think we need to do while we're in the pause step or phase, and that is to, like you said, to remind ourselves that whatever happened back there happened, that something happened, and I have a perspective on what happened, but the other person also has a perspective. And what most of us do when we're in conflict, doesn't matter with whom we're in conflict with, but what most of us do is we're stuck on what we think about what happened, and we do everything we can to get that person to see our perspective. We give very little thought to the idea that there's another one that
I need
another perspective that also needs to be heard.
Right.
And if we're to have a good, healthy conversation, both perspectives need to be heard. So in the pause, before I jump down to the next step, which is listen, I need to shift in my mind and in my soul, if you will, that I'm ready. I'm not there anymore where I'm saying I'm going to get this person to hear me out. I'm actually willing to say, I don't know what happened back there, but something happened, and I'm willing to hear your perspective first.
So I heard you in an interview about this from the perspective of marriage, and you were being interviewed with your wife, and you talked about how you very quickly go to pause. I don't know if you realize that, but that was what I got out of the episode, was that, you know, the goal was to go to pause as quickly as possible before things get escalated. And, you know, I'm looking at workplaces where things might have, like I said, they might have been escalated for 10 years because we didn't deal with that comment made back then. And again, managers often don't realize how long-term their words have impact. So, you know, if you get 10 years out, it's pretty embarrassing when it finally comes to the fore. You know, you're still thinking about that. You know, you feel embarrassed that you're bringing it up. But the quicker you can get to pause, I guess, is what I'm hearing, is the better off you are.
Well, absolutely. Again, because of the very same thing what you're saying, Mark, is because our words have power.
Right.
They really do have an effect. And you say sometimes the managers don't recognize that the words that they said affected somebody, and it's lasted for 10 years. Husbands and wives don't think about that.
Right.
Parents don't think about when they said something to their teen or their young child. My wife was saying again last night, she saw in a grocery store a grandma just going on and on and on, griping about their 8-year-old. Get away from there. Don't do that. Come on, get away. And just doing that. And the grandma has no idea the impact of the words and the tone and everything she's doing in her interactions. It's going to affect that child, potentially on some level, the rest of his life.
Yeah. Well, like I said, I had great parents, great marriage, and I would like you to stop convicting me now. We're going to have to move on. It's hard being a parent. It's hard being in relationships with people, isn't it? Like this, there's a reason that this pledge talk exists. So,
well, I think relationships are the greatest joy. And I think it's what we long for more than anything else. We were made for relationship.
Yeah. Made for connection.
And yet that is where obviously our greatest pain comes from. Fears of pain and so forth. So it's just a real back and forth.
Love that.
So I can appreciate that.
Okay. So we don't go on for 30 minutes on one letter.
Okay.
Take us from pause. I appreciate all that. I mean, the pause is like you said, it's not just something you gloss over. It's a thing that you're doing. It's a choice you're making. And then you get a chance to listen. You made a point of saying that whoever presses the pause button is usually the one who sort of initiates the next 3 steps. So tell us about listen and how.
So the next 3 steps, would be to that if you and I were in a conflict, Mark, and I would say, okay, Mark, hold on a second. I kind of like this thing you and I got going, this relationship and friendship, and I don't want to see it ruined anymore. let's just stop a minute, take a few breaths, do a little internal work, remind ourselves of our friendship, remind ourselves that we both have perspective. And then if I'm going to hit the pause button, I'm going to say, hey, I'm going to say, I don't know what went on back there, but I want to hear it. So let me initiate the second step, which is listening, and then echoing and disarming. So I will take the lead on the next three steps. And so I volunteered to listen, but then the key is I need to listen to understand you.
Uh-huh.
And this to be true the moment I say this, and your audience will know this to be true too.
Yep.
The tendency on all our parts is when we're in a conflict situation, we're not really, we are listening, but we're not really listening to understand the other person.
Yeah. We're listening for ammo, right? So that we can win this argument.
That's exactly right. We're listening to one of two things. They're kind of, they play together in hand in hand. Both are negative, but we look for ammo because we go into the conversation without thinking about it in a defensive position.
Mhm.
So we're going to look how to fight, and so we want to find the ammo we can use. And so when I'm listening to you, what I'm doing then is I'm looking to see everything that you've got wrong.
Yeah.
Well, I didn't say that back then. No, no, that happened 2 days ago. And
Yeah.
that was you the one who started this thing. And you think I had tone, you had tone. And I'm just listening to everything that I can that I'm
Right.
thinking that you're telling me that's not correct.
Yeah.
It's in error.
Yeah.
And that is largely a big part of my ammo. So I take all of that, and as soon as I get the microphone, if you will,
Yeah.
I throw all that back to you and say, that's not true. That's not true. This is what really happened. That's not true. That's not true. Well, what do you think's happening on the other end at that time? The other person, now like you in the situation,
Yeah.
in the natural, you're going to be listening to me in the same way.
Yep.
That's not true, Mark. I didn't do that. That's not true. That's not true. That's not true as well. And then where has that gotten to us? We're both escalating the conversation, the conflict.
And
So
oddly enough, I've never heard that you listen to me, right? Like, if you start immediately attacking me, I'm going to say, you didn't hear anything I said.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, that's great.
That's exactly right. So I need to listen. I say listen to understand. Yes, absolutely. But what am I looking for? I'm working to hear what you want me to hear.
Oh, that's a great. I'm listening to hear what you want me to hear.
Exactly. Because you're trying to communicate something to me.
Right.
You may not say it the best way, the right way. Maybe
Yep.
you say this, but you really meant that. And I need to kind of sort it all out so that I can say, what is my friend Mark trying to communicate? What does he want me to hear?
So let me give a counter example of what this often looks like when you miss that listening step. Is somebody poorly communicates, I don't know, I'm in a workplace, so maybe it's gruff language, coarse language, like you said, tone of voice, etc. They do have a point, but they said it with all of that, attitude. And so the other person says, well, you're not going to talk to me that way. And like, that's the end of it, right? Like only the style, none of the content came through to the other person.
Yes.
And so I'm somehow in my pause and listening, I'm going to have to separate all that style out and say, okay, I know this person has something in there that's a good intention. They're trying, this is important to them. And their relationship with me is important. I want them to work for me, or I want to have a good relationship with a coworker. What is it they're trying to say? What is it that they want me to hear? I got to figure out what that is and pull it forward.
That's exactly right, Mark. That's exactly right. And I talk about, I remind my audiences of the game of dodgeball. Most of us can still remember playing that at some point, and that ball coming at us, and we don't want to get hit, so we dodge, right? And it's the same kind of a thing when we're in dialogue with someone and they're frustrated. Maybe they were never taught pledge, or maybe they know it, but at the moment it's not in the forefront of their mind, right? And a friend, my wife, someone says, "You always do that."
Yeah.
in that always word, it's
Right.
one of those trigger words. We
Yeah.
all have the experience.
Right.
It's the trigger word, and something happens inside of us. It's like,
Right.
and it just causes all this internal cognitive dissonance and so forth. And what I suggest is learn to dodge words like that.
Mm.
Let the always word go by,
Mhm.
or the tone. Just kind of don't,
Mhm.
when they say and they point the finger, just kind of try to get out of the way of those and stay zeroed in, focused on what is it they want me to hear. Because they're hurt, they're angry about something.
Right.
What is it?
Right.
I mean, and here's the deal, Mark. That's what I want someone to do with me.
Right. Right.
This is how and why I know that how I learned the principles that I teach is over this, because this is how I want people to communicate with me.
Yeah.
So the question is, am I willing to do it with others?
And there's a humility that is required for that to happen. I mean, I tell this to managers all the time, that there's a humbleness that you're going to have to do this. The person who says you always do that, when I hear that, I feel very much treated like, insignificant. And, that's the word that comes to my mind. I feel trivialized. Like that's all I am to you, is just, I always do that thing.
Yeah.
You can't let that trigger you. You're going to have to get past that, dodge it. I love that.
Yeah.
Once you have received it though,
Yeah.
what do you do once you have received what you needed to, what they needed you to know? What is it that you do with that?
So again, great question, because that moves us to the next step. Once I receive it, I kind of like that. It's an interesting idea. I'm not quite sure I've used that word before. I've always used the idea of once I sense, I know what it is they want me to hear.
Okay.
But either way,
Sure.
once I sense it, then I want to move to the next step.
Mhm.
And I could at that point just say, okay, I got it.
Yeah.
Sure. And if that was you and me, Mark, and I said, okay, fine, I got it. I know what you're saying.
Yeah.
In your head, you're thinking,
Yeah.
did
Does
he really get it? And you don't know.
Right. Right.
The only way you can really know is if I go to the next step, which is to echo, or to echo back.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd simply say, okay, Mark, so you're saying, you and I know that we tried this podcast a couple of weeks ago and it didn't work. And you could be mad at me over that. You could say, Mark, you didn't do your prep work ahead of time to be prepared for this. I mean, who do you think? You think I got hours and hours and hours to spend time with someone trying to figure out all the technology? I don't have, and you can be mad at me about that. I'm just
Right.
And if you kind of and so we got on here today and you're upset about that, I could listen and maybe hear even maybe some beneath your words that, man, time is really, really precious to you, and maybe you're thinking I don't recognize that. So I don't know. I might just say, I just echo back and say, so you're really frustrated about this because of that, and I wasn't prepared, and say a few more things about that, to echo back to let you know that I heard you, and then I might ask you and say, did I hear that correctly? Is that what you're saying?
Checking for confirmation that you've understood. Yeah.
Again, don't you want to know?
Yeah.
That I've heard you.
Right.
And even more so, have an opportunity to say more clearly if I miss something.
Yeah. So I have a colleague, Thad Bartlett, really smart guy who is an instructional designer and has produced some curriculum. And he made a point to me once that when you do that reflective listening, as I've called it with my clients, when you reflect back what you think you heard him say, you get three things that happen. Either they say, yes, you got it, or they say, oh no, that's not it at all. Or there's the mixture of, yes, that's it, and let me add some additional clarifications. In all three opportunities there, in all three options, you win, right? Because A, you better understand them, and B, you get credit for trying to really understand them. That's a goodwill builder. So it's echoing is huge. I want to let you say anything more you have about that, but I want to make sure that we're going to end it after this letter, because the next step is something you do that's really special, and I think we're going to have to give it its due. We're going to have to do a second episode. But what else would you share with folks about echoing and how that works?
Interestingly, you talk about how important it is. My son says, and my son's in his mid-30s, he says, "Dad, this is my favorite step." Echo, he says. Interestingly, for a lot of people, it's a bit more challenging because it feels, at first, if they're not used to doing this at all, it feels a little bit weird to echo back.
Right.
And I understand that, and I can appreciate that. The interesting thing is, when someone does it to them, they always really appreciate it.
That's right.
When someone takes the time to, I sat with a gal that who I've hired to do a few hours of work for me each week, and I was yesterday with her sharing some stuff, and it took about 20 minutes, and she echoed back well, and it's like, oh my word, because it indicates to us how the other person was listening and how well they're listening, and we feel just like, we feel cared for, we feel loved, we feel respected, all those things, and it's a beautiful thing. So when we do it to others, it might feel awkward, but you're doing something really good, and going to be really beneficial for the relationship. The other person is going to know whether or not you've heard them.
That's right.
You're going to know whether or not you've heard them.
You can move forward with that.
Yeah. Which is critical and necessary for to one day, hopefully, or at one point experience some resolution. We have to move forward, but we have to move forward together.
Right.
Okay, we're on the same page. We're doing this together. We're going from here to here to here, and we're making progress in what I call a healthy conflict conversation. So
I'm going to put a button in it there, and I'm going to just give a little teaser for part 2 of this, because you and I talked about this. My podcast partner Mike and I are big fans of the book Crucial Conversations. Yep. It's clearly something that you understand and appreciate as well. And we found the book confusing enough. It's this dense manual of a book that we turned it into a 6-part podcast series, and we have a handout, and so all that's on the website. But what we don't have, I think, in Crucial Conversations spelled out the way you spell it out, is step 4, the D of pledge, which is disarm. And I'm going to let you get into that in the next episode. So definitely come back, because you're not done with echo until you do this disarm step, and it's really powerful how you do it. So I'll put a button in it there. Mark, you may not know this, but we have a professional voiceover artist who usually takes us home. So I'm just going to pause and let the dulcet tones of a beautiful man speak.
And that's a wrap. It doesn't take a genius. The blog dedicated to reducing the irreducible. Next time, prime numbers. What makes them so special? Join us then. And thanks for listening.
That's good enough.